Right, hello and welcome to the ground of Dings Crusaders in Frenchay, South Gloucestershire, just on the outside of Bristol. You can just see behind me Purdown, and behind me now you can see the M32, which connects Bristol to the rest of the country. And the reason I've come here today is it's a kind of what used to be a waste ground, which is the kind of area where sports fields spring up throughout the late 19th century and even into the present day. Dings have only been here for a few years. This site was suggested for quite a long time for the new stadium for Bristol Rovers. And this material we're looking at this week is about the role of the British pioneers in the early history of sport in South America, and many of the stories of what are often remembered as the founders of football or the fathers of football take place on pieces of ground like this, often in between railway lines and canals, the major transport arteries of the 19th century, rather than motorways. And the B4076, which is behind the camera. But I think that also speaks to the link between sports and transport revolution, because it's next to railway stations, railway lines where football was first played. So in most of the histories of South American sport which exist, they begin with a similar story of a British pioneer striding out onto a piece of ground like this, quickly explaining the rules to his friends or whoever he's been able to drag off the street and saying, play, and the game begins. And meanwhile others watch what's going on and become enthralled. Maybe some children come along and say, what are those strange foreigners doing? And they like the idea, and then they take it up themselves, and years later the sport becomes national, becomes a part of the national identity, whether it's Peru, Brazil, Colombia, Argentina or Uruguay. So most of those first British pioneers are held to be either representatives of railways or shipping companies. There's quite a lot of British sailors in those stories of the first cricket matches, rugby matches, football matches in South America, and also teachers, and we'll come and look at teachers in more detail and the role of education in the spread of sports in South America. There are British teachers too. Alexander Watson Hutton, famous founder of the Argentine Football League, Isaac Newell, whose team Newell's Old Boys in Rosario, Argentina, one of the central major clubs of Argentinian sport. So, this is how South American sports history normally starts, but of course we started last week with indigenous, rural and colonial sports. Most of the conventional history is some brilliantly written books by Tony Mason, Passion of the People, Alex Bayos's book Futebol, A Brazilian Way of Life, Chris Taylor's book A Beautiful Game, Journeys Through Latin American Football, all start with this idea of the British centrality of sporting histories in the region. So that's what we'll be problematising this week, looking at some of those histories. We'll look at Charles Miller, we'll look at the first game of football in Argentina in 1867, and we'll ask ourselves what is the politics, what are the cultural meanings behind these activities.